is it out there? Because you're outside of Lucas Oil right now. Is it cold? It looks cold.
It is very cold. Penn State played Maryland last week, and it was just brutally miserable with wind chills in the teens. I think it might be colder right now, about 22, 23 degrees, I would assume right now. It's very cold, but you know what? It's football weather.
It is prime football weather, as Jameis Winston would say.
I was going to make a Jameis reference as well.
Oh my gosh. Well, the horses are prepared for battle, as Jameis would say, as the number 1 team in the nation is taking on the number 3 team in the nation that is looking for an upset. We've got a lot to dive into, Andrew, but the first thing I want to ask you, have you encountered any fans on your trip to Lucas Oil Stadium? Because I have a feeling this might be a little bit of a home game for Penn State, given the location.
So, yeah, we've seen some fans out here in the parking lot. We passed a number of fans on the road. We drive a marked vehicle that has Nittany Nation, our Penn State show, all over it, and we got honked at a number of times. So I do think you're right. This could be very well like kind of a home game for Penn State. Penn State fans already travel really well. Just look at what they did at USC. That was a home crowd at USC in Los Angeles in the Coliseum. I don't care what USC fans want to say. They kept saying how great that atmosphere was that night. Yeah, it was great because Penn State fans showed up. It wasn't because of USC.
It was absolutely great because Penn State fans showed up, and also because Tyler Warren, tight end for Penn State, went 224 yards against USC, his highest yardage of this season. So let's get into this game. I have quite a bit to say about Oregon, of course. You have quite a bit to say about Penn State, of course. We're both alumnus of our respective teams that we're covering today. So first, I want you to break down this offense for me. Drew Allar at quarterback. However, the passing game isn't really the focus of this Penn State team. It's really their rushing offense with Tyler Warren, Nicholas Singleton, and Katron Allen. So tell me more.
Well, can we laugh at how you just said this is a run-focused team and the first person you named was a tight end?
Yeah.
Like, how funny is that? This is a Penn State team that does a little bit of everything. It'll break out all the stops. We've seen an offensive lineman, Vega Ione, is a big offensive guard. He comes in motion. They line him up at tight end, and they'll put him in motion. You see a lot of stops, a lot of tricks, and a lot of kind of gimmicky-like things pulled out of this offense, but it's very much within the scheme of it. You mentioned Drew Allar's not always been great. He's not really the focal point. He hasn't had to be because they've been able to do a lot of different things. This is a team that wants to run the ball first, but they can pass the ball really well. Just look at that comeback against USC where Allar almost went for 400 yards. But this team would rather him not have to do that. Allar has thrown for under 200 yards in 4 games. Penn State has won 3 of those games. That one loss was against Ohio State. But in that game, not only was he under 200 yards, but it was the only time under 200 yards where he didn't get 65% passing and he turned the ball over. So if Drew doesn't turn it over and controls the ball and keeps it in his own player's hands and completes his passes, he doesn't have to throw a lot of yards. They've proven that they can win. And a lot of that has to do with Tyler Warren, as you mentioned, but also a really good defense.
100%. And when it comes to Oregon's defense against Penn State, that might actually be what turns the tide of this game in Oregon's favor, in my opinion. You have several incredible athletes, specifically on Oregon's defense. Jordan Birch coming back from injury for an excellent performance against the Huskies. Mateo Uiagalelei leading the Big Ten League in 10.5 sacks on the season. We even have Tatum Tuioti at linebacker with 49 tackles, 5.5 sacks, and 1.5 sacks versus UW plus 1 forced fumble. So tell me a little bit about what Penn State has to do to take on this well-rounded Oregon defense.
Well, I think it's getting the ball out of Drew Allar's hands pretty quickly. They're pretty decent at it, getting to Nick Singleton and getting to Tyler Warren on those quick passes. I think that's going to be the key. Penn State's receivers have drawn some criticism really over the last couple seasons. They don't have elite wide receivers back when they had a guy like Jahan Dotson or Parker Washington, both guys in the NFL right now. They don't have those kind of caliber guys, but they haven't necessarily needed it, quite frankly. If they can run the ball, I don't think there's a chance Oregon can stop them if they can run the ball. That's a big if, though. Penn State has looked great running the ball and has looked dreadful running the ball. It just depends on what day of the week. Penn State, I think, had 250 yards rushing in each of their first 4 games, and I don't think they've done it since. This is a team that has been a bit up and down on the running game. But if they run the ball well, there's not a whole lot Oregon's going to be able to do because Penn State's just too balanced. But it's an if. It's a giant if. I'm not saying they're going to do it. It's an if.
Well, let's also talk about James Franklin, head coach's record against top 10 teams. I'm sure you're going to hear this all weekend, Andrew. That is
you
three.
Think this is a new conversation?
Oh, exactly. It's a conversation old as time. 3-18 versus top 10 teams. Lanning is 3-3. So how do you think that factors in as a big conversation point for this game?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I like to point out on this stat is that stat is more about Michigan and Ohio State and less about Penn State. I know that's not what people like to hear. They like to jump on James Franklin. But if you look at most of those top 10 matchups, it's against Michigan and Ohio State. Mm-hmm. The last couple of times they've played teams that aren't Michigan, Ohio State, think about it. They went to the Rose Bowl and beat Utah. Yep. 2 seasons ago. They went on the road and beat a ranked Auburn a few seasons ago when Auburn was still really good. They've done a really nice job at winning games and winning pretty big games in James Franklin's career, as long as those teams aren't Ohio State and Michigan. And I get it. That's a problem. I totally get it. It's a problem. But I do think the conversation has to be more about Ohio State and Michigan and less about his inability to win big games, because one thing he's done throughout his career, he wins the games he's supposed to. Penn State rarely gets upset. It's just he doesn't win the games against Michigan, Ohio State. But I don't think that factors into this Oregon idea. Like, oh, he can't beat Oregon because Oregon's number one. He can't beat top teams. No, he can't beat Michigan, Ohio State. I think it's totally different.
And a huge shout out to Michigan for getting Penn State into this championship to begin with. Ohio State.
Yeah, Ohio State can't beat Michigan either.
Yeah, seriously, because Penn State was plus 4,000 in odds to even make the Big Ten championship. So the fact that they are in is insane. And when it came to the tiebreakers for the Big Ten Conference on who would get in this championship game, only 2 of the 10 scenarios included Penn State. So this really is a rarity of a game and something to thank Michigan for beating Ohio State in their final game of the season. I also wanted to move on to the defense for Penn State because that's really where the Nittany Lions shine, especially with Abdul Carter, who is an edge for the team. He's going to be an NFL draft big pick coming up for this year. He's got 54 tackles on the season, 10 sacks, 2 versus the recent 44-7 win versus Maryland. He has 2 forced fumbles, and he has 19.5 tackles for loss. 10 of those tackles for loss are sacks. So you know that Carter has Dillon Gabriel's number for this entire game. And one of the things with Dillon Gabriel is he is a short passer. He's not that good with mid-range or deep balls. Versus Wisconsin, he was pressured a lot, so that really impacted his accuracy in mid-range to deep range. What does Abdul Carter need to do to really get in the mind of Dillon Gabriel? Because this is basically a game of Oregon's offensive line versus Abdul Carter.
Yeah, it is a little bit. I mean, Abdul Carter is insanely quick. He's a converted linebacker. This is a guy that was Penn State's middle linebacker last season, and he's just so big. He's like 6'3", 6'4", 240. And they decided he was better served on the defensive end. I think they look at him a lot like Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons actually never played defensive line at Penn State. He played only linebacker. And so Abdul has this great speed. He can get to the quarterbacks. But I think what's really impressive about Abdul Carter, too, is a stat you didn't mention, 19 tackles for a loss. Yeah. As a defensive end, to have almost double the tackles for loss as you have sacks, yes, you get a tackle for loss for every sack, but to then still have 9 other ones, that's really impressive because defensive end is not usually your run stopper. They're the guys that get after quarterbacks. But we've seen him track screen balls down. We see him tackle downfield. He's incredibly quick. And the one thing Oregon's got to be very careful about is if you start doubling up Abdul Carter, Deny Dennis Sutton on the other side is going to beat you. Deny Dennis Sutton doesn't have a ton of sacks this year, but he is a strong, nasty human being. He is a guy that is very, very disruptive. He hasn't been healthy all season, but he's getting healthier now at the right time. And if they put too much pressure on Abdul Carter, Penn State has got a wealth of other defensive ends. And this defense has played better and better every week. And we're seeing his best right now.
And let's talk about what Abdul Carter is up against in Oregon's Joe Moore finalist offensive line. Really, the guys in front have had an incredible succession from their first game versus Idaho, where they had 2.9 yards per carry. Kind of a miserable statistic, so miserable that Oregon offensive line coach Alik Terry wore a T-shirt with the number on it to practice to motivate his athletes to do better in the trenches. And right now, Oregon's offensive line is soaring with their Josh Connerly Jr., Nishad Strother, Iapani Pancho Lalolu, and Ajani Cornelius. Now, their right guard might be a way for Penn State to penetrate when it comes to those trenches, because Marcus Harper II, their typical right guard, has been out since the Ohio State game, but since the Michigan game with an injury. Kawika Rogers and Dave Iuli have been filling in that position, but there has been some false starts when it comes to Dave Iuli, just trying to get used to that position, given that he hasn't played a single game up until the Maryland game. Do you think that Penn State might use that interior offensive line shakiness to an advantage?
This is a place Penn State hasn't been the strongest at this year, is interior linemen. They had a player leave the team mid-season who was a rotational guy, and they've had some injuries there. But Zane Durant is one of the biggest snubs of the all-conference teams. The defensive tackle for Penn State is a bit undersized. 6'1", 6'2", maybe at most, probably 290-ish. He's a smaller defensive tackle, but he's really disruptive. Wears number 28, looks like a running back, a really disruptive guy. And he's a guy that can take advantage of a weaker interior of that offensive line. But, Oregon wants to pass the ball. It's plain simple. They want to pass the ball. So I really think as good as Penn State's interior defensive line is, it's really just going to come down to how well does Oregon block the defensive end and the pass rush. And again, as you mentioned, that's Abdul Carter. That's guys like Deni Dennis Sutton.
I was just going to mention Deni Dennis Sutton. I'm so glad you brought him up. Not to cut you off, Andrew, but Deni is somebody you're really going to want to look for on the Lions. 16 solo tackles on the season, 4 sacks, 1 forced fumble. Versus Maryland, he had 3 total tackles, 1 sack, 3 quarterback hurries, which I think is very important, especially for this upcoming matchup, and 1 tackle for loss. I think he's really going to bring the pressure when it comes to Dylan Gabriel and the Oregon offensive line. Can you give me more of an insight on what to look for?
He's the guy that really feasts when teams spend too much time focusing on Abdul Carter. He's a really big guy. I think he's probably 6'6", 260, 270.
Yeah.
I think he's the most physically imposing player when you stand next to him on the field. And he was actually behind me last night at the Penn State basketball game. He's been physically imposing outside of that. He's just a really big dude. But he's not been healthy. That's been the thing. His story this year has been his inability to stay on the field. It's funny, after last week, he played so well. James Franklin said to him in postgame, we were down there on the field, he said, maybe you shouldn't practice any week, because that's the kind of season he's been having. Is just been banged up, but he's still been really, really effective. And if Oregon puts too much attention on Abdul Carter, Denai's going to get there. Denai's absolutely going to get there. He's a disruptive player.
And another question I wanted to ask you, Andrew, focusing away from the play and more on to the pageantry of the game itself. Give me your lowdown on these uniforms. We've got Penn State all white versus Oregon's green goblin combination is what they're calling it. Do you have any hot takes?
Yes, I have hot takes. Look, I like Oregon's variety of uniforms. I love all of their colors. I love all of that stuff. And you're giving me black? You're giving me black?
Girl.
You had a chance at an all-time uniform matchup with Penn State Stormtrooper whites, as they like to call them, white pants, white jerseys, because they don't wear anything else. Penn State doesn't have alternate jerseys. They've got white pants and white jerseys, blue jerseys and white pants. It's the same every week, right? That could have been an all-time uniform matchup of like the all greens versus the all whites. That would have looked so good in the bright lights, but you gave me black. And I'm going to tell you, Oregon, this is a disappointment. You are starving us of one of the best uniform matchups in the Big Ten championship history.
You know, I have to completely disagree with you, Andrew. I think that these Fly era jerseys are one of the best presentations from Oregon, especially within their Generation O line. If you look at their shoulders, they have the steel-plated motif as well as the carbon fiber wings, not only referencing the early 2000s uniforms for the Ducks, but also the 2010s and the Marcus Mariota era with the carbon fiber wings. The green helmet on black uniform combination has actually never been done for the Ducks, which is shocking for people to believe that there hasn't been a uniform combination done for the Ducks. But this is the first time we're seeing it, and having this produced by Nike, Van Horn Brands, and also the Oregon Uniform Committee, I think that this is a ode to uniforms past for the Ducks, and I have seen a lot of squabbles online saying, why aren't they wearing green? Why aren't they wearing yellow? You see that in the end zone at Lucas Oil Stadium. It is a green and yellow. So you have the original colors represented in some way. And Andrew, I also wanted to ask you, the Ducks are favored by...
Can we keep talking about threads? Can we keep talking about the threads for a second? Okay. First of all, one of us has to have good taste. Clearly, it's not you. But second of all, you talk about the classic ode to history in the Oregon uniform. Penn State hasn't worn a different uniform in like 60 years.
Girl, we know.
About history. I don't want to hear about history in the Oregon uniforms. I don't want to hear it. Okay, that's not history. Black uniforms with printed carbon fiber wings. How is that an ode to history?
It's an ode to the Marcus Mariota era where they wore the carbon fiber wings.
So it's an ode to like 5 years ago. Okay, got it.
Hey, I see what you're doing here. I respectfully disagree, and I think that this is a great way to show innovation as well as an ode to the Generation O, which is the generation of people who knew the logo originally introduced in the 2000s. But hey, we can both agree to disagree. But I think white on black is it's a cool yin and yang, if you will. And I also wanted to ask you about Vegas Insider and most betting sites favoring Oregon by 3.5 points. Do you think that that's a correct evaluation, if you will?
I was surprised the number was that close. But I said on my show this week, I actually think Penn State holds Oregon under 24 points or just 24 points. Okay. I just think Penn State's defense doesn't give up a lot of points. They've got some bend but don't break in them. They force a lot of field goals. If Oregon can score 30 points, Penn State doesn't have a chance.
Yeah.
I just haven't seen enough out of Penn State's offense this year, particularly as the season's gone on. This was a better offense early in the year. But I think Penn State's defense keeps them in it. Again, this is Penn State defense that held Ohio State to 20. Nittany Lions should have won. Should have beat Ohio State. This shouldn't be a conversation. Penn State had 2 first and goals from the 2-yard line in that game. Mm-hmm. About 1 in each half. And they came away with a total of 0 points on both of those drives. Penn State should have beat Ohio State. I think this is going to be a chance to get some revenge. And I think Oregon is going to feel a little bit of Penn State's hatred for that O. It's just a different O that Penn State wants to avenge right now. It's the crimson and white that didn't show up here.
And what is at stake? Let's get into what is at stake. So the person who wins the Big Ten championship goes on to play the Rose Bowl on January 1st in a second-round playoff game. Penn State will most likely make the playoffs despite winning or losing, but whoever hosts a first-round game at home December 20th or 21st. Now, the Rose Bowl situation would best benefit Oregon because it would basically be a home game, something very rare for West Coast teams when it comes to playoff games. Tell me kind of a little bit more about your perspective on these states as on these, let's say, stakes as a Penn State journalist.
Yeah, I mean, Penn State, Happy Valley, State College, they all want to see Penn State host a playoff game, but I don't. Look, at the end of the day, it would be cool to watch an SEC team come into Happy Valley when it's 18 degrees outside and blustery and windy. That would be really cool. But at the end of the day, there's such an advantage in having that bye and getting off to one of these playoff games and these bowl games. It's just such an advantage there. And so people can say all they want, that they want to see this SEC Big Ten matchup in a frigid rigid Happy Valley, but it's just not what's in best interest for the team. No team actually wants to not win this game.
Yeah, exactly. Every team wants to win at the end of the day. This is football. And Andrew, I also wanted to ask you, going back to the game itself, one of the things that Oregon really thrives in is their depth in receivers. We have Evan Stewart, we have Trayshawn Holden, we have they have Des Johnson back from injury, scoring in the third quarter against UW. His statement of "I'm back." It seems like Oregon's receiver core is very deep. So how does Penn State really attack a fully bolstered receiver core that Oregon has?
Well, this is a strength of Penn State. Penn State's secondary is very, very good. They've been hurt a little bit by injuries. They lost starting safety Kevin Winston early in the season. He got hurt in the second game of the year. But they've really done really good job. Guys like Zakee Wheatley, Jalen Reed have really stepped it up. But the corners have played really, really well. You know, A.J. Harris is a Georgia transfer, and I think as a sophomore, he's come in and hit the ground running, I think, better than anyone expected him to do. They also picked up Jalen Kimber from Florida in the portal, and he has done really well. But I think A.J. Harris has really shocked people with how dynamic and how much of a playmaker. I'm not so worried about Penn State's ability to handle the wide receivers. The one thing, Penn State will give up dinks and dunks all day long. They'll give up quick passes. They'll give up quick slants. They'll give that up all day long. They just don't want to give up the big play. And that's something that they're going to play and defend against, is going to be giving up that big play.
Any final thoughts, Andrew?
I think this could be a really good game. I know what a lot of the national media says about this game. People, you know, I've heard people say Penn State can't even win a playoff game if they get in. This year in college football, winning has been really hard. Winning has been really hard. I mean, Oregon squeaks by Ohio State. They squeak by Wisconsin. Like, they're the only unbeaten team left. But it hasn't been a dominant – it's not been what we've seen out of Alabama or Georgia in recent years. There are no true dominant teams this year. And I think that's going to play out inside Lucas Oil on Saturday. I just think this is going to be a much closer game than a lot of people think. I think it's going to be a really good game, and I really look forward to a good game. I'll say this, though. Again, as I said earlier, if Oregon's offense gets going, it's over. Penn State will not win the shootout. They just won't.
Yeah, if Oregon gets to 30, it's kind of a wrap on the Nittany Lions. And what is your score prediction if you have one?
Oh, score prediction. Well, I got to go Penn State because I know you're going to go Oregon. We do predictions on our one show, but I wasn't hosting this week. So let me come up with a let's go 26-24 Penn State. 3 field goals out of walk-on kicker Ryan Barker. He's been great.
Alrighty. I like that. I think I'm going 31-27. I think 31-27 is good. I think the Ducks will hit that threshold. I mean, they have the receiver core. They've got Jordan James fully healthy. They have Noah Whittington. I think they have a lot of firepower, and I think their offensive line will seriously hold for ground game. And Dylan Gabriel, as long as he is comfortable in that pocket and as long as he is continuing on his short throws, typically to the left, he is pretty darn good. So, Andrew, thank you so much. This is Andrew, who's a sports director from WTAJ in Altoona, Pennsylvania, covering Johnstown and State College as well. You are on Twitter, Andrew. Plug what your Twitter is. Where can people find you?
You can find me at Andrew Clay TV. We do a 30-minute Penn State football show. We have that posted up online. So if you really want the Penn State perspective on this, you can just head over to search Nittany Nation on Google. We have an app if you really want to download it. You know what? I'd love everyone in Portland, Oregon to have the Nittany Nation app by the end of tonight. So go ahead and do that. I'll wait.
He'll wait if you want to get the Nittany Lion perspective. He's got all night outside of Lucas Oil Stadium. Andrew Clay, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Allie Osborne. You can watch me on Everyday Northwest every weekday, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Portland's CW. And you can catch me on Game on Sports on KOIN 6. Follow me at Allie S. Osborne. Thank you so much.